Hello, it's me, Joshua Schultz, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we assess emergent bilinguals in the content area classroom. We'll talk about the different types of assessment that exist, and we'll talk about how we can translate the practices and principles. Hi, my name is Joshua Schultz, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I use assessment for emergent bilinguals in the content area classroom. We'll talk about the principles and practices of using assessment to inform your teaching. First, I'd like you to take a look at this comic strip. What does it make you think of? For me, it makes me think of the inequities that exist in our education system in relation to English language learners in particularly. We may have students who have a lot of linguistic knowledge when they come to our classroom. Perhaps they are fluent in their first language. They may be able to read or write. They may be multilingual, but they are positioned often as having a deficit because they're starting many times as emerging or beginning English language learners. So we have to make sure that there are many ways to assess the knowledge of our students and the progress of our students, and we want to make sure that we're drawing on their linguistic and cultural resources and able to do so, and making sure that we're positioning them as students who are going to be successful because they're bringing many wonderful things to our classroom. Well, let's first think about why we assess. We assess for three principal reasons. One, we want to evaluate a student's progress towards our lesson objectives. So in each lesson, we have content and language objectives. And we want to make sure that our students are making progress towards those daily objectives in our class. It is not necessary that the student always demonstrates that they have met the objective. In other words, students at times won't meet those objectives, and that's okay. We just have to be able to refine our teaching in order to ensure that the next time our students are able to make progress. We want to be able to, secondly, identify areas of growth and areas of need of attention. So, in other words, we want to see those successes and those challenges for our students. And last, altogether, we have to think about the ways that the data that we're collecting is going to inform the next steps in our instruction. What do we have to go back and change? In what areas do we have to add additional scaffolding or instructional support? There are various types of assessment. We have formative assessment, and formative assessment, as its name suggests, is meant to inform your instruction as it's happening. Okay, I'm going to give you, in the next few slides, I'll give you some examples of formative assessment, but these are things that are happening during the class, in the moment, where you can tell if the students are understanding. It may be things like discussions, questions, checklists, observational notes. Okay. Summative assessments are those end of the unit or end of the year forms of assessment. They assess the big objectives, perhaps of the unit or the entire class. A couple of words that you hear or terms that you often hear associated with assessment are criterion referenced and norm referenced. Criterion reference has to do with whether or not the students are making progress towards specific objectives, or standards. Norm reference has to do with how the students are doing in relation to uh, all other students who are at the same, perhaps, English language learning level. Okay, so you may hear about how students, whether students fall into a particular percentile. If they're in the 75th percentile, that means that um, that there are 25% of the students are doing less than or performing less than they are. So there is, you hear about stanines, percentiles. It's just in relation to how other students across the board are doing in a particular um, area. Assessment for English language learners could take many different forms. And I think the standardized assessments are typically in practice, they're given to you. States adopt certain forms of standardized assessment, so I'm not going to focus on that here. But I'm going to think about some of the creative assessment ideas that I've used um, to support English language learners or emergent bilinguals. And in the yellow column, we see a list of assessment ideas. I've used journals and learning logs. Every single day we would have community meeting times. Now I taught second and third grade, but that could, exist K to 12 and beyond. The journals may have asked students to have an open discussion about something that they have learned or something that maybe they are still struggling with. It's a great way for you as a teacher to be able to gain an understanding inside the cognitive processes of the child, of the English language learner, or emergent bilingual. Something as simple as academic conversations, in which we ask students to explain their new learning, is very important. Now, a student may need some extra scaffolding help by a sentence frame or a model of an explanation. If you provide that, perhaps on an anchor chart, the student may be able to use that to support his or her explanation of their new learning. Okay. Cornell notes and graphic organizers are used to structure one's note taking, and there are a lot of examples available online. Student-teacher conferences or small group discussions. In reality, small group discussions are probably the more manageable way to be able to check in with students on their learning. Okay, takes no more than 5 minutes. Should be done regularly throughout the course of a unit. Each class can end with an exit slip in which you tell me, what do you think? For example, I've used the 3-2-1. I asked some students to tell me 3 things they've learned, 2 things they um, have questions about, and 1 thing that they'll tell their parents that day that they were excited about in school. Something like that. That's a 3-2-1. That's typical. There are a number of others. Closed activities, reciprocal teaching, in which you are asking students to teach to another group what they have learned. You could record the student's language through technology. I've been teaching since the 1800s, so we used to use tapes, and we would keep tapes in order to support your data collection. Now you can do that with your phone. Okay, so there's a lot of different assessment techniques here in this yellow column. So let me know if you have any questions about those. In the green column, one thing I wanted to highlight before we go is this whole idea of authentic assessment. Authentic assessment, as its name suggests, has to do with like real life functions of language in which the kids are, using language in real ways. Sometimes we don't do this so well in class, in school settings. And I think it's really hard for us to be able to think outside the box, okay? Because we have to really think critically about the way we were taught and kind of shake that off, because there were some good ways and some bad ways, but think about reflectively what were some of the ways that you can think to use language in ways that actually has meaning beyond the classroom walls. In language arts, you may do a whole unit on a genre such as a memoir or narrative in which you're reading a number of exemplar texts. Have the students write their own memoirs or narratives, but don't leave it at that. Share it. Publish them on a blog. Share them with other grade levels. Have your students be guest readers of their own narratives to other emergent bilingual students. Incorporate the student's first language. It's highly unlikely that the student will speak a less commonly taught or spoken language in a school setting. So if they speak Spanish or Thai or Vietnamese, find the other students that speak the same language, and the student can share their narratives across the grade levels in the school. There are other ways in language arts. Students can interview or do dramatization or readers theater. That's where you take a small portion of a narrative that you're reading and have the students make a play out of it. Okay, an old radio show, for example. I wanted to tell you too about interviews. Students might pretend they're a particular character, and they will interview. They'll interview each other pretending that they are that particular character from a book. In science, you may have the students write field guides for particular places that are, in the general vicinity. You could have them do public service announcements in which they are going to perhaps advocate for the preservation of a particular area geographically. This is a great way to incorporate academic language, a real-world purpose for using that language, gives them an opportunity to practice, work together, work cooperatively, incorporate technology, and voila, share that with an outside audience. And lastly, a look at civics and social studies. Maybe there are other English language learners coming in from a certain particular area. You may have a welcome brochure that talks about the history of the school, the history of the area, using students both languages. They can work cooperatively across language groups or with similar students who speak the same language to be able to incorporate both languages in that particular brochure. And the brochure does not sit on a shelf. Okay? Again, I've been teaching since the 1800s. We used to laminate all these things, but right now you can put them on Weebly's or websites. Okay, I didn't talk about math. Math is not my area of expertise at all. But I'm sure there are a lot of other ways to use clinic assessment in mathematics. I just can't think of any right now. But I'm going to leave it right there, and you can ask me any questions that you have about different types of assessment. So think about ways that we can ensure that assessment is equitable for our students. Is it really informing our teaching? And ways to connect what we are learning about our students and then taking what we have learned and tweaking what we have planned for the next day, the next lesson, the next unit, etc., to be able to support our learners where they are. That's how I use assessment, and I'm sure that you will find there are many valuable resources out there about assessment. Colorín Colorado is a phenomenal website, www.colorin, COLORIN, Colorado, as it's spelled.com. Tons of resources available. Okay, so thanks for listening.